Hey guys, welcome back to Ace Recaps. Today I'm going to be explaining a 2020 Hindi horror thriller film titled Batal. In a far-off land in rural India, we watch as a group of villagers worship a demigod named Lord Batal. They offer the idol some sacrificial blood and pray to it, hoping that it satisfies the thirst of the evil lord. The mountain is kept a secret from the rest of the world, as if the word gets out, all hell will break loose. An old woman grabs onto the idol only to have terrifying visions. She tries to attack the priest, but they cover up the idol and she passes out. All the villagers run out in fear, shouting that nobody from the outside world should ever enter the mountain. The villagers then manage to seal off the mountain, keeping the all-powerful being trapped inside. A century later, we are introduced to Ajay, a builder, who managed to grab an amazing deal from the government to construct a tunnel through the mountain. Ajay, along with his daughter Sanvi and wife Shaku, await the arrival of the chief minister to inaugurate the project. It is further explained that in 1857, during the British rule, Lieutenant Colonel John Lyndoch and his men used to camp out at the mountain and lost their lives in the process. Even with the permission of the government, the villagers seem to protest and not let the construction team through, as they know of the evil that lies within. We are then introduced to the protagonist of the film, Vikram Sarohi. Sarohi heads a private team under the guidance of the Indian military. He and his team are well known in the country for taking down major terrorist organizations, but he still has terrifying nightmares for having had to kill a little girl on one of their missions. The military chief, Tyagi, is in charge of evaluating and getting the team the right missions. Not knowing how to open up the tunnel before the chief minister's arrival, Ajay contacts Sarohi and makes up a story along with fake pictures that the villagers who are protesting are terrorists that smuggle illegal substances all throughout the country, and they use the tunnel to do so. The only way to protect the country from these terrorists is to have them arrested so they do not halt the development of the nation. Sarohi, being a good soldier, does as he's commanded. He and his team head off to the site immediately. They try to talk the villagers into surrendering, but they decide to fight back. The villagers are beaten up, arrested and finally loaded onto trucks to be sent out of there. As a team moves ahead towards the mountain, they are interrupted by a few more villagers. They try to handle it peacefully, but Ajay causes an explosion, leading them to believe that they are under attack, and they open fire. Ajay celebrates with sweets along with his family, even though there are dead people all around them. Two of the villagers are arrested and they beg Sarohi not to open the tunnel, as it would unleash pure evil onto the world. Meanwhile, the construction workers open up the tunnel and move in for further inspection. As they enter, none of them seem to respond until one man walks out with his guts hanging out. Fearing that they've been ambushed, Sarohi and his team are called on again to investigate further. The team, now on high alert, move in with night vision goggles. Inside, they run into the ancient British men who capture and slaughter the soldiers, but luckily some of them manage to escape. Outside the tunnel, some of the soldiers seem to be bitten, but they don't have the time to tend to the injured as the ancient army starts firing on them. The soldiers recall passing by an ancient barrack, so everybody decides to retreat. When they get there, the arrested woman from earlier warns them to leave the bitten people behind, as they are now infected. The British army gets closer and starts firing on them. The soldiers take cover, but unfortunately Ajay's wife gets shot and passes away. The soldiers, having no other option, fire at the door, break it down, and run to safety. The prisoners, on the other hand, fearing what is to come, barricade themselves in a room and threaten to kill the soldiers if they try to break it down. Sanvi mourns the death of her mother while her heartless father tries to calm her down, showing no remorse about the death of his wife. One of the injured soldiers manages to regain consciousness and is informed about the bite on his leg. The team doesn't think much of this and shrug it off. When they examine the crime scene, they find ancient bullets on the floor and come to the conclusion that the terrorists used homemade ammunition to take them down. In reality, it's the undead army of Colonel Lyndoch that managed to escape when the tunnel was reopened. The chief of the military, Tyagi, seems to have gone in shock, causing her hair to turn gray. All the circumstances surrounding the incident appear to be caused by something sinister, but the brave soldiers just keep coming up with a logical explanation. The soldiers move the dead into the washroom and manage to turn on the electricity inside the barrack. They set up cameras to spy on their enemies, but everyone seems to have disappeared. Tyagi suddenly wakes up and claims that the colonel spoke to her inside the tunnel and asked her to join him in taking over the world. They try to contact other military personnel, but nobody appears to be responding. The soldiers then decide to camp there until sunrise and wait for the chief minister's arrival, as he'd be accompanied by a military squad. Out of nowhere, Tyagi starts screeching loudly and scares the team. Meanwhile, the dead soldiers who've been bitten all over suddenly wake up and kill a fellow mate. Everybody rushes in only to find his guts been torn out and the dead soldiers missing. They blame the villagers, claiming that they must have been behind the unfortunate situation. Sarohi tries to break down the prisoner's hideout, so she lets him in and tells him the truth. The prisoners manage to get their hands on Ajay's wife and have nailed her to the floor. They seem to be performing some sort of ritual around her and claim that the people bitten, scratched or even shot by the undead army eventually wake up and hunt down the living. She then lights up a joint and explains the curse of Batal. The colonel was so obsessed with power that he learnt the ways of black magic and started worshipping the demigod, Batal, in return for an everlasting army. They protected the barrack by drawing a line of salt around the building which the zombies can't cross. Anybody infected will rot from the inside and not even their soul will be spared. The infected will join the colonel's army and do anything for him. She further instructs him that the only way to stop the infected roaming around the building is to light them on fire. When Sarohi warns the others about what is really going on there, they don't believe him and decide to head out into the forest soon. Sarohi then goes on to kill one of the infected, but just before he could do so, he is stopped by another soldier and is tied up. The conversion process begins for the infected man and he starts puking up black goo. Meanwhile, Sanvi, who's in bed, spots the zombies crawling on the wall towards her. Luckily, Sarohi manages to escape his bonds and along with the prisoners, save the little girl and lock the zombies in the room. When Sarohi attempts to convince his team once more, the infected soldier turns and attacks the others in the room. The night further bears bad news as it starts raining heavily, causing the line of salt to dissolve, leaving them all exposed. The soldiers finally realize what's going on and join forces. They capture the zombies and interrogate one of them. On questioning him, we realize that when trapped in the tunnel, the colonel sacrificed his own son to Batal and was the first to transform. He then took down his own men and turned them into his everlasting soldiers to take over the country. The army think, see and feel all as one, so Sarohi lights up the other zombie alive and even the infected soldier feels the pain. The colonel is looking for the girl as he needs to sacrifice a virgin to Batal to complete the ritual and escape the mountain. Sanvi notices the colonel hovering next to Tyagi, freaks out and runs away. Tyagi, even though not infected, has joined hands with the colonel after looking him in the eyes. The army slowly marches forward in order to infiltrate the barrack and the soldiers just freeze in fear. Ajay starts beating his daughter thinking that she is the reason behind all this, but she is luckily saved by the prisoners. They try to escape from the rear exit of the building, only to get jumped by the zombies. Not knowing how to protect the little girl, the soldiers lock her in the room where her mother is nailed to the floor as it's the only secure chamber in the entire building. They instruct her not to open the door for anyone but them, as her life is in grave danger. The bitten prisoner ultimately falls prey to his wound and dies on his wife's lap. Just as he turns, the brave prisoner chops his head off with a sickle. Tyagi tries to convince Sarohi to bring the girl to him, but just then they are interrupted by Ahu, who tries to arrest the heartless woman. As they argue, the dead English army starts marching towards them. While the army inches closer, the soldiers try their best to hold their ground. Tyagi goes to the locked chamber and tries to convince Sanvi to open the door. Her father comes there, and asks Tyagi to speak to the colonel. As they are all an extension of him, he can hear all their conversations as well. Ajay tries to strike a deal with the colonel. He promises to get his daughter out of the room and sacrifice her for the colonel's cause if he shares his power with him, and he agrees. Ajay tries to convince his daughter to open the door, but she just lashes out at him and blames him for the death of her mother. He then tells the colonel that he can still be useful to him, so he tries to open up the back exit to let the army inside the premises. Meanwhile, the soldiers manage to hold the ground and are surprised that the army stopped coming towards them. Alu spots Ajay and goes to stop him. He tries to bribe her with a year's salary, but she doesn't accept it, so he uses a knife and slits her throat. The zombies then infiltrate the building through the back door, but they don't harm Ajay. Looking at this through the camera, everyone barricades themselves in whichever room possible. Sarohi goes to the secure chamber and asks Sanvi to open the door. Just as she does so, her mother frees herself from the latches and tries to infect her own daughter. Luckily, Sarohi enters in time and manages to kill the evil creature, securing their safety in the room. On the other hand, we watch as Ajay goes back to his car and fetches a bomb, to get his daughter out and sacrifice her to the colonel. The zombies flock out the door, trying to get to the little girl. The prisoner on the other hand gets stoned and tries to kill the zombies, but she realizes that there's no hope. Sarohi finds a cannon in the armory and comes up with a plan to escape. They fill the cannon with nails and gunpowder and let the zombies in. As they come in looking for Sanvi, Sarohi lights up the cannon and takes out many of the zombies. All the remaining creatures scream in pain. Sarohi meets up with the rest of the clan and decides to put an end to Batal once and for all, before the infection spreads to the rest of the country and planet. While the zombies storm into the barracks, Sarohi and the rest of the gang manage to sneak out the back exit. They navigate through the forest using night vision goggles until they come across Alu, who's now a zombie. She tries to convince them to join the colonel, but Sarohi stabs her in the neck, ending her life. They mourn over her death and light her up with gunpowder. They continue on their journey and the prisoner leads them back to her village. She gives them some dynamite and devises a plan where they expect to fill a doll with these explosives and take it into the mountain disguised as Sanvi. They will detonate it and bring down the entire mountain, killing the colonel and Batal once and for all. Just then Sarohi gets a message that the other officers have arrived. Two of the crew run in to warn them, but they are jumped by the evil creatures and the officers lose their life. To avoid the wrath of the zombies, the two get into their car and hide. Tyagi on the other hand shows up at the village to take the girl away. Just before Sarohi is about to kill her, the colonel reaches out and infects Sarohi. All the zombies suddenly disappear. Confused about what's going on, the two soldiers get back to their hideout, only to find Tyagi on the floor depressed that the colonel used and let go of her. She then pulls the trigger and ends it all. Sarohi on the other hand is seen dragging Sanvi into the mountain while all the zombies await their arrival. As he enters the forbidden room, we watch Ajay being caged like an animal. Sarohi, who's being controlled by the colonel, makes Sanvi lie down on the sacrificial altar. The colonel tries to convince Sarohi to finish the job and lift the curse once and for all, but something inside him just doesn't let him slice her throat. He uses this opportunity and stabs the colonel in the eye. All the zombies cry in pain as they've now lost an eye as well. Sarohi then proceeds to shoot the colonel multiple times. The last remaining soldiers use the car and drive straight into the mountain, firing at all the infected monsters. Sarohi finally loses the battle as the zombies get to him and munch on his flesh. With his last breath, he orders Sanvi to run out the mountain and set off the explosion as her father has a bomb in his hands. She does as he says and manages to end the wrath of the colonel once and for all. Finally, the remaining soldiers and Sanvi drive back to the city. She finds an ancient book that reads, "Under no circumstance should the shrine of Batal be destroyed, as it would cause the ancient god to be set free and take over the world." The movie ends as we watch the ancient English soldiers descend on the lands of India. That's all, folks. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.